Hey everyone, welcome back to another stock market outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. As always, we'll talk through the major indexes, how they performed. They'll talk about some earnings reactions such as Pubm, Ttd, Roblox, and Airbnb, as well as UPST. They'll move on to some true market leaders, how they're performing. Are they trending, showing distribution? We'll answer that question. And then we'll talk about my watch list, how it performed, sentiment from a few different sources, the IBD big picture article, and finally the GMI signal, richardlmoglen.com. So if you do enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and take the time right now to leave me a like down below. It really helps me out a ton and my channel. And let's dive right in and talk about the Nasdaq Composite. So overall, we're trending nicely above a rising 21 EMA and 50 SMA. We were definitely extended going into the week, well above the 21 EMA and the 50 SMA historically. And we did see that stress test, which I warned about in the previous video on this day and also on Wednesday. However, we recovered nicely inside day and also a very tight day as well on this Thursday. And we finished the week off strong, and going to a weekly chart, this looks pretty constructive, just trending above that 10-day moving average. So, or actually a 4-week moving average, I believe, on the weekly. So it looks pretty good. Going over to the S&P 500, this looks very similar. Stress test on this Tuesday and Wednesday, and then nice recovery into the end of the week. And we're seeing a lot of breakouts to new all-time highs, new leaders emerging, so things look pretty good from that perspective. Looking at the Russell 2000, this kind of gives you a sense of how small caps are doing. This broke out of a nice longer term base and now had a natural reaction and then finished the week off with 2 inside days. So I definitely want to see this confirmed to the upside and challenge these all-time highs. But we're trending above a rising 21, 50, and 200-day moving average. Everything looks very constructive and set for another potential uptrend like we saw emerging from this base right here. Looking specifically at small cap growth, let's take a look at the IWO. This looks very similar, although it's not breaking out of the space just yet. We had a retest of this prior area here and finished the week off with 2 pretty tight inside days. So once again, I want to see some confirmation, a challenge of this pivot. But if we do kind of just go sideways next week, that would also be pretty constructive. Lastly, let's take a look at the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF. This showed a lot more distribution than the IWO, IWM, and the other indexes we talked about, but also recovered pretty nicely on Thursday and Friday. So from an index perspective, we were extended going into the week, and we had that kind of natural pullback, stress test, whatever you want to call it, and we finished the week off strong with many stocks acting strong as well, and a lot of setups going into this week. So things look pretty good from an index perspective. And now let's take a look at some earnings movers, and let's start with Airbnb. So overall, I like the look of the setup moving off the right-hand side. Basically, it had a breakout from a VCP type base before earnings. Tough to establish a cushion before here, but we had a strong push on very high volume. And then we had a downside reversal, a pullback into the range. We found support right here at around 187, 188, and then a constructive move on Wednesday and Thursday, and then a really strong push on this Friday, basically finishing the week right near these highs right here. So this by MarketSmith is the standard pivot, but definitely you want to see some constructive pullback, and then you can manage your risk at this swing low. That would be a lot better than buying when it's kind of short-term extended going through this pivot. But also you can watch a high volume move through this prior pivot, which also lines up with this previous high right here during its IPO advanced phase. So ABNB, one of the better movers and definitely a focus for me going forward. And also you've got a very similar looking chart with Roblox, which also had an earnings gap up, strong push, breakout to all-time highs, then it reversed, gap down, stopped me out here, and I didn't actually get back in here. So I'll be watching for some type of consolidation, tightening action, and then you can manage risk right at the swing lows. So just because you missed the initial push or the U-turn even, don't give up on these stocks, because like UPST going back a while ago, they often form some type of consolidation right near a base pivot and will let you in on some type of break of a flag, DTL, whatever, what have you, and they will let you in if they're going to go up 200, 500%. So don't feel like you need to push things and enter overextended. You just got to wait for your proper setup. And speaking of UPST, this also had earnings going into this week, and it unfortunately gapped down pretty strongly here, and is forming a range right here above 241, but looks a little bit weak, and we'll have to see how this basically resolves itself, whether it's the upside or the downside. And as of right now, it's not really on the focus list. It needs to heal a little bit. You've got pretty high volume on this drop down. And overall, this was a little bit extended from the 200-day. Historically, it had pulled back to the 50-day, but always, you have to manage risk using position sizing going into earnings, because they can turn out like something like this. And we also saw a similar reaction from Coin. I was in this one. It's pretty much resolved itself and healed the chart here. So I'll be watching this one for some type of setup once again. You had basically just a pullback to the 21 EMA. And this still, to me, is growing very, very fast. You've got institutional sponsorship here. I would like to see the annual estimates increase, but we'll have to see how those turn out over the next few months. But definitely wants to watch Coin going forward. UPST needs a little bit more time. And I also want to mention U here, which had a very strong reaction. It actually gapped down, but finished up on the day and fall through beautifully, and is 100% short-term extended. You can see the power and the volume here. So definitely want to watch if it forms up a little bit of a shelf, tightens up for an inside week potentially, and then resolves itself through that type of flag. Pubm and Ttd are also two that I want to mention here. These kind of have the same type of theme. Here, Pubm is within a longer term base. It's got more overhead supply than Ttd, but you also have the highest volume ever going into this name on this strong gap up. You didn't have a great close, but you did have two tight inside days out the week. So one to watch going forward. And this could maybe form out some type of consolidation below the 44.19 pivot. So one to watch going forward if you like the theme. I would like to have seen a better closing range 100% on this day, but just one to watch and add to your potential universal list. TTD, on the other hand, is definitely kind of changing character here with this gap up on very high volume. You had nice fall through the next day, did reverse on this Wednesday, but finished the week above 100 as well as previous all-time highs. So this is definitely a focus going forward. If it tightens up once again above this pivot and then pushes upwards through 100 again, that would be ideal. And what I really like about this chart is kind of how it's healed itself here. You had some gap downs, heavy distribution, but over time it's kind of formed out a nice longer term base. If you go to a weekly or monthly, it definitely looks a lot stronger, especially on the monthly. A nice upside reversal at the lows and a nice push out from a monthly base. And this stock has had a history of nice long bases, then an extended run. You can see that over and over again. Even here, it's kind of a base type structure with the COVID correction as well. So definitely want to watch going forward for an entry on a weekly chart, a daily chart, and this could be a potential leader. You've got tremendous growth here, very consistent growth as well. Annual estimates are up, so that's a good sign. So TTD, definitely want to watch and add to your universe list. And with that, let's go over to TC2000 and talk about the rest of the leaders I'm watching. So sorting by the weekly change, U is first up, and we already discussed it. Great reaction to earnings here. Super strong volume, definitely extended at this point, but want to watch after some type of consolidation. TDD as well, we already talked about, looks great. DOCN also trending nicely. You had earnings, I believe, on this day here, the 4th, and overall above all the key moving averages, looks pretty strong, but also pretty short-term extended. App also standing out, especially last week, showing a lot of relative strength and nice push after earnings here, and also tight, pretty tight inside day to end out last week on Friday. Moving on to S, nice push out of this base right here, a little bit choppy in here, but did hold the 21 EMA. ASN breaking out of the short consolidation here. It had a little bit of a failure, but reset with the inside day and a nice push on Friday on higher volume. Mara, a minor here, trending above the 10-day, looks super strong into new all-time highs, although it did pull back on this Wednesday right here. TAS still forming out of base, and definitely want to watch if it can really form out and push through the 50 SMA, which is resistance so far. SPT forming a little bit of a pivot here, pretty wide and loose. I would like to see it tighten up a little bit, but back above all the key moving averages within this consolidation. AMD super strong off the 10-day, looks great. Net holding that 10-day as well, looks super strong. Netflix off the 21 EMA looks pretty strong. Great move on Friday as well. And EMPH, this is definitely a leader, especially within the solar space. And there's another one that had a nice longer term monthly base and now is potentially ready to go on another run like it had from this type of consolidation and this base as well. DDOG also pretty strong after another earnings gap up, going tight sideways, looks decent. Crowd, failed reversal, failed breakout here, needs to tighten up and really recover and have a push through on volume through these areas. Perry going sideways, a little bit wicky up here, but still holding up and looks pretty good on a weekly chart after this big push up from the bottom of this base. Zscaler, a leader within the cybersecurity space, really strong action holding the 10-day, looks great. Airbnb, we already discussed. Moving on to team, you didn't have a great close on this earnings gap up, and kind of that trend has continued as it pulls back into the 21 EMA, but doesn't look broken or anything like that. Lucid, super strong, holding that 10-day, definitely a leader, but it is a little bit more speculative. You don't have earnings or sales yet, but definitely set up for swing trades, especially with an inside day to end out last week. Moving on to Nvidia, you can see it's super strong as well, not even pulling back to the 10-day moving average, but you do see some signs of maybe sell distribution, churning action with these high volume days without further price progress. In mode, pretty much going sideways above the 21 EMA. Bill going sideways after this gap up looks decent. HUT, another miner holding that 21 EMA. MTDR holding that 21 EMA as well. Not really a focus at this point. I'm kind of back to the more traditional growth type industry groups, and that is an oil and gas name. AMBA holding the 21 EMA, and this type of action was kind of expected after all these days of just kind of marching higher above the 10-day and probably even the 5-day moving average. Coin recovering and healing a little bit after this earnings gap up, or gap down rather. SI also had negative action on this day, but recovered into the end of the week. AHR, nice move here on this Friday, inside day and up, and still just kind of grinding higher nicely after this breakout from the base and earnings gap up. LC pulled back into the 21 EMA below a kind of flag here, but still maybe needs a little bit of time. We'll have to see whether it can break through this pivot around 45 or so. SC pulled back into the 50 SMA. This doesn't look great, pretty choppy, kind of slow moving, especially compared to the 2020 run here, and not really leading at this point. Bros, definitely an IPO to watch, but not a great reaction to earnings, although it is pulling back into the prior kind of IPO-based pivot. So this could be a good spot to manage risk. If you do get an inside day and then an inside day and up towards all-time highs, that would be a great spot to enter this name, which has a pretty good story as well. Skin, not a great reaction. I assume this is earnings, this distribution on high volume, and right now it's just kind of back within its base. Affirm, not great reaction to earnings, although it did gap up. Didn't have a great close, and this is kind of a mirror image of this bar right here, and needs to tighten up here for me to be interested once again. Tesla, also not great action, definitely some distribution on this bar, and I think this maybe needs another base here and to let that 50 SMA kind of catch up to price. UPST, we already discussed, gap down here, but forming out a range, and we'll have to see which way it basically chooses, up or down from this point. So that's a quick run through of these potential true market leaders. Let me know any suggestions to add to this list in the comment section down below, and also let me know down below in the comments if there's any names I should take off this list as well. And now moving on to my watch list, let's take a look at how these perform. Let's sort by that weekly change. Overall, a lot of the gappers did fairly well. Roblox, U, ASAN as well. But obviously there's the ones on the other end, PLTR, UPST, which had negative reactions. And going through the charts that we haven't already discussed, let's start with Sophie. And overall, we had a gap up, not a great close, but it's basically back at this consolidation pivot right under 23.63. So I'll be watching for some tightening action and a push through that on volume, and ideally basically a push towards these all-time highs. GDRX as well, not a great reaction to earnings, back at its 200-day moving average. I was watching for some type of earnings reaction and maybe a change in character, but it still looks pretty sloppy and volatile at this point. We talked about those. PLTR declining after earnings below all the key moving averages, doesn't look great at all. Just looks like it's entering or re-entering this basing consolidation period. So I think those are actually the only ones we need to discuss further. Definitely some decent names on this list, especially when it comes to earnings reactions. ASN as well, pushing out and peaking above this consolidation. And make sure you guys tune in later today when I'll be posting my next list of ideas. And I'm moving on to sentiment. Let's start with my Twitter surveys. We saw an increase from 38.4% bullish to now 53.3%. This is getting a little bit on the high end, so keep that in mind. Also looking at the name exposure index, this did decrease, but it's still above 100, so it's a little bit frothy in terms of historical values. Looking at the put-call ratio, it's still very low. Looking at the bulls versus bears poll, we're back towards that 60 mark. We're trending upwards pretty sharply. So once again, definitely things are a little bit extended in terms of sentiment still to this point. Looking at the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is Stock Market Extends Rebound, but was shakeout enough to resume the advance? Reading through the article, they discuss the action of the indexes and basically discuss whether this shakeout and pullback last week was enough to kind of reset the market and potentially start a new advance. They discussed the VIX, how we're still a little bit extended in terms of historical extensions for moving averages, and also how we didn't have too many breakouts on Friday. But overall, their current outlook is still a confirmed uptrend with 2 distribution days on the S&P 500 and 1 on the Nasdaq. Finally, we've got the wishing well GMI signal, which is still green since October 15th. And overall on Thursday, the GMI score was a 6 out of 6. So my current view is still a confirmed uptrend. We did have that nice shakeout, got a little bit less extended in terms of extensions from the 21 EMA, 50 SMA on the kind of normal market indexes I look at. And we'll have to see whether kind of these setups confirm to the upside or downside. Earnings reactions were a little bit mixed, but I think net we saw a little bit more positive reactions than negative ones, which could be a good sign for the risk appetite of institutions. But we'll have to see. You always have to plan for kind of whatever can occur next week with your positions and also your focus list as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.